The tree was not covered with gold or even filled with treasure. Rather, it was filled with hay for hungry farm animals. The second tree was excited because the woodcutter took him into a shipyard, and he knew that soon his dream was going to be coming true. He was going to be this large, built, strong ship for the kingly. But no mighty ships were being built that day. Instead, the once strong tree was hammered and sawed into this simple little fishing boat. Too small and too weak to sail on an ocean or even in a river, he was taken to this little lake, and every day he just brought in loads of dead, smelly fish, day after day after day. The third tree was taken to a lumber yard and cut into these strong beams and just left there in the lumber yard. All I ever wanted to do was stay on the mountaintop and point to God. 3 trees, 3 dreams, all seem to be shattered. Many days and many nights passed. The trees, over time, almost had forgotten about their dreams. On one star-filled night, a young woman placed her newborn baby into a feed box. And the first tree knew that he was holding the greatest treasure of all, Jesus Christ. One evening, a tired traveler and his companions crowded into this old, stinky, smelling fishing boat. The traveler fell asleep as the second tree quietly kind of sailed out into the lake. A storm suddenly arose, and the little tree just shuddered. He knew he wasn't strong enough to carry the passengers with all of the rain and with all of the strong wind. The tired man awakened. He stood up and he stretched out his hand, and he simply said, "Peace." And the wind and the rain completely stopped immediately. The second tree knew that he was carrying the King of Heaven and the King of Earth. One Friday morning, the third tree was startled when her beams were just literally yanked from the woodpile. She flinched as she was being carried through this angry crowd. She shuddered when soldiers nailed a man's hands to her. On Sunday morning, the third tree knew that God's love had changed everything. God's love had made the feed box this beautiful thing by holding the Christ child. God's love had made that small, smelling, stinky fishing boat into this strong boat that withheld the storm. And every time folks thought of that third tree, they would think of God and of God's resurrection. Love, God's love, had changed everything. The next time you are thinking about your dreams, and maybe your dreams are not coming true the way that you had hoped, the way that you had envisioned in your own life, remember this little simple tale of 3 trees. And just wonder how God is working through your dreams and making His purposes come true in your life. I most relate to that third tree. And I would encourage you to think about your own life and what you kind of relate to in this little tale. All through high school, all through growing up as a child, we lived in one house, one place. Never wanted to move. Just kind of wanted to buy a house, live close to my parents in Northern Virginia, work as a Navy auditor, and everything would be fine. But God had different plans. Got a call, became an itinerant minister. And you know, we don't stay around very often. You can't put up with us but for so long, and then it's time to go somewhere else. But I wouldn't change that for the world. I wouldn't change that experience of moving around from place to place for the world. Wasn't my first choice, but it certainly has been a treasure and changed my life forever. Can't even imagine not knowing you, not being able to be your minister, not being able to be your friend. And I wouldn't have if I would have stayed there in that one place like that third tree wanted to do. That third tree would not have been that beam to carry the crucified Christ and then experience the resurrection of Christ. So when we think that our dreams are all falling apart, when we think that life has just dealt us this terrible hand, and indeed sometimes it is very painful and very hurtful, just know that God is there with us, and that God is there encouraging us, and that somehow God's purposes are being worked out in these dreams, in this thing that we call daily living. You see, Epiphany is a time when we kind of just celebrated Christmas. We have this baby being presented in the temple, and then later on we hear about this child going to the temple and getting lost from his parents. Jesus is maturing as a teenager. Jesus is growing up as a young adult and as a man. And eventually he becomes our Savior. Epiphany is a time for us to keep growing, to keep maturing, to keep trusting God in the faith. And wherever life leads you, know that your God, your Savior, your Creator is there present with you forever. If you trust Him, if you follow Him, you know that His love has changed everything forever. And God's love, it has no limits.